Texas Hill Country, June 1877. Retta Albright had just buried her husband the week before when the banker came knocking with papers and a smug smile. She stood on the porch of the dry, wind-worn house, her hands tight at her sides, while her two children, Lyle, aged 10, and little Lula, 7, watched from inside with wide, quiet eyes. "You have until the end of the month," the banker said, tapping the paper against his palm. "Debt's debt, widow or not." The door creaked shut behind him not a minute later, and Retta leaned forward, pressing her forehead to the frame with a silent, burning ache in her chest. The ranch had been in her husband's family, but the land was signed over as collateral last spring. She had not known not until after the fever took him, fast and mean. She did not cry. She made coffee. She fed the children. She kept going. That evening, with dusk setting fire to the sky, she saddled the mule and tied both children behind her in the cart. She had one place left to go. 3 hours west, the trail narrowed past the creek by Devil's Elbow, and the sun was long gone when she saw the firelight. She pulled the mule to a stop, heart hammering harder than it had all week. The campfire crackled under a cottonwood tree, and beside it sat a man sharpening a knife on his knee. He looked up as she stepped forward. "Retta." "Aaron," she swallowed, fists at her sides. "I need your help." Aaron Vega stood. He was taller than she remembered, taller than anyone had a right to be, really. Broad in the shoulders, lean everywhere else, sun-browned and steady-eyed. He had not changed much since they were children, except now he looked like he had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. "Been 10 years, he said. "I know." He glanced past her, saw the children in the cart, his jaw set. "You married that preacher's son." She nodded. He stared for a second before sighing and tossing the knife aside. "You better sit. You all look half-starved." They sat around the fire, Lyle and Lula eating jerky like they had not tasted food in days. Aaron passed Retta a tin cup of water. His eyes never left her face. "You came for help." "I need to keep my land," she said. "I need someone who can ride fence lines, repair the barn, move the cattle. I need someone who is not afraid to work and I can pay you with," she faltered. "Well, I can feed you." He looked down at his boots, scuffed and dusty. "I have work out west. I do not have anyone else to ask." His eyes flicked to the children, then back to her. He rubbed the back of his neck. "How many head?" 18. "Maybe 19 if the red one is still breathing." He exhaled. "You never did ask easy things. I never needed to before." He looked at her so long she started to rise, her stomach tight. Before she could, he nodded once. "I will come." Relief swept through her like breath after drowning. She did not smile. She just nodded and stood. "We leave at first light." They rode back in silence, the trail silver with moonlight. Retta did not look at him, though her skin prickled every time his boots scraped near hers. 2 weeks passed. Aaron worked like he had been born to the land. He fixed the barn roof, broke the wild filly, and taught Lyle how to set snares near the creek. He never asked questions. He never slept inside. He made a lean-to near the edge of the pasture and stayed there, copper coffee pot and a rolled-up blanket his only company. Every morning, Retta found herself watching him from the porch, arms crossed, hair pulled back, trying not to care. But she did. He was kind to her children. He never pushed her. And sometimes he would glance at her like he remembered the way they used to run through the orchard behind the schoolhouse. Her braid caught in the wind, his hand just behind hers. Then came the day Lula went missing. 1 second she was chasing butterflies, and the next she was nowhere. Retta screamed her name until her voice cracked. Lyle ran every direction, tears streaking his face. Aaron saddled his horse so fast Retta barely saw him move. "She was chasing that blue one," Lyle said, pointing toward the ridge. Aaron took off and Retta followed, heart in her throat. They found Lula just before dusk, sitting at the edge of a dry ravine, her ankle twisted, tears streaking her sunburnt cheeks. Aaron dropped from his horse and scooped her up like she weighed nothing. Retta ran to them, dropping beside him as he lowered her gently into her mother's arms. "I am sorry," Lula sobbed. "You are safe," Retta whispered, kissing her head. Aaron nodded once and turned back down the hill silent. That night, Retta stood at the edge of the pasture. The wind was dry and warm, and the stars burned cold above. "You could have been killed," she said as Aaron approached from the dark. "You would have done the same." She looked at him. "Why are you here, really?" He met her eyes. "Because 10 years ago I was too young and too stupid to tell you not to marry him. Because I loved you then and I never stopped." She stared at him, heart thudding. "And now?" she asked. He took a slow step forward. "Now I cannot stop watching the way you move, strong like fire. I cannot stop listening for your voice in the morning." He paused. "I am a fool for you, Retta." Her cheeks flushed. "You are a damn fool." And before she could second-guess it, she stepped forward and tackled him, full force, into the dust. He hit the ground with an oof and she landed on top of him, her hair loose, her eyes burning. "You are a fool," she said again, breathless. He grinned up at her through the dirt and said, "Then fool's what I will be." She kissed him. And everything else, the dust, the heartbreak, the years between, fell away. The morning after, Retta rose before the rooster called, long before the sky turned from ink to slate. She stepped outside barefoot, the dry grass cold beneath her soles, and stood at the edge of the porch with her arms wrapped around herself. The night air was still. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Aaron had gone back to his lean-to after she left him in the pasture. She hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't waited for an invitation. That unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She turned when she heard the soft latch of the door behind her. Lula padded out, rubbing her eyes. Retta crouched and reached for her, pulling her close. "Your foot," she whispered. "Still sore," Lula mumbled, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "But not bad." They stayed there until the sun began to lift, painting the ridge with thin fingers of orange. Once the light touched the field, Retta stood, tightened her shawl, and told Lula to wake her brother. She found Aaron near the corral, checking the latch on the gate. His hat shaded his face, but not enough to hide the bruise forming on his jaw where she'd tackled him. "I didn't mean to break your face," she said, arms crossed. "No need to apologize," he murmured, not looking up. "I'd take worse." She shifted her weight. "You left quick. I figured you'd want space." "I didn't ask you to go," he paused. "You didn't ask me to stay." She took a step closer. "I didn't know I could." His eyes met hers then, and something quiet passed between them. Not a question, not an answer, just knowing. 2 weeks stretched on, long and lean. The creek dried another inch. The cattle grazed lower on the slope. Retta traded 2 cured hides for flour and seed, and Aaron pulled 3 fence posts from the far field, recut them, and set them again without complaint. Lyle took to trailing Aaron like a shadow. One afternoon they came back with a string of fish, Aaron showing him how to gut them with a bone-handled knife worn smooth. Retta watched from the window, her hands still in the washbin, the soap grown cold. After supper, when the children were asleep and the wind had softened, Aaron stood near the porch rail, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. Retta joined him, the boards creaking beneath her step. "Where'd you learn to mend saddle leather like that?" she asked. "Mexican soldier taught me, down in Chihuahua. I worked for a horse breeder there for 2 seasons. She nodded. "You've been far. Far enough to know most places weigh the same. Dirt's dirt, trouble's trouble. And here," he looked at her then, "here's heavier. But worth carrying." A gust lifted her hair from her shoulder. She didn't speak for a long while, just listened to the night sounds. Then, quietly, "You said you were a fool for me." "I did." "You still feel that way?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I think about you when I'm hammering a nail, when I'm feeding the animals. When I wake up in the dark and forget where I am, I listen for your voice." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what I am anymore. You're raising 2 children on your own. You're fighting to keep what's yours. You know exactly what you are." She felt something shift inside her, something slow and unfamiliar, like a door opening that had been stuck for years. She looked at him, trying to hold it in her eyes. "You planning to leave?" she asked. "I was. And now, I'm waiting to see if I get asked to stay." She stepped closer. "What if I'm not ready to ask? Then I'll wait. I don't want to owe you anything. You don't, not a thing." She looked up at him. "But I want to give you something." He nodded once. "Then give me your time. That's all I'll take." She reached for his hand. He let her. Neither of them spoke again that night, but when she turned to go back in, he followed her to the door. Not inside, but close. And that was enough for now. The rain came sudden, hard, and without warning. It had been nearly a month since Aaron had come to stay, and the hill country, parched from weeks of dry sun, opened its throat and drank deep. Thunder rolled low across the ridgelines, and the steady downpour turned the clay paths into slick ribbons of red. Retta hauled the children inside from the porch just as the wind snapped the clothesline. The sheets whipped through the yard like ghosts. She barred the door and lit the lantern, its glow casting soft shadows on the walls. Lula huddled beneath a quilt, her foot still wrapped, while Lyle stared through the window, eyes wide at the storm. Aaron had gone to check the lower pasture before the clouds turned. She told herself not to worry, it was just rain, but she watched that empty ridge until the sky turned black. He returned near midnight, soaked to the bone. She opened the door before he knocked, lantern in hand. "You're late," she said. "There's a calf stuck in the gully," he replied, water dripping from his hat brim. "Took some time." She stepped aside, her eyes tracing the mud streaked along his boots, the torn fabric at his shoulder, the flush in his cheeks from the cold. "You get it out," he nodded, "but I'll need to stitch its leg come morning." She set the lantern down and reached for a towel. "Sit." "You're shivering." "I'm fine. You're soaked." She grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the hearth. "Sit." He obeyed, wordless, as she knelt beside him and started peeling off his coat. The fabric clung to him, heavy with rain. She worked in silence, her hands steady despite the way her heart galloped beneath her ribs. "What you do before I found you?" she asked, not looking up. "Ran cattle down near Eagle Pass. Took odd jobs when that dried up. Sometimes freight work. Anyone waitin' for you somewhere?" "No." She paused, fingers still at the buttons of his shirt. "Ever married?" "No." "Why not?" He watched the flames curl in the hearth. "I kept thinking about you. Didn't seem fair to anyone else." She sat back on her heels, the air gone still between them. "Reckon I don't know what to say to that," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." "I want to." She hesitated. "I wanted a life with you once, you know. Before everything got tangled." He looked at her then, water still clinging to his lashes. "I remember. When my father died, I didn't know how to hold it all. The house, the land. I married Elias because it felt like the only way to keep from drowning." "I know." She shook her head. "You never said anything. You just left." "I was 17, Retta. What could I offer you then? I barely had a saddle to my name. You could have said something. You could have asked me to stay." She sat quiet, staring into the fire. Outside, the storm softened to a hush, the kind that settles over soaked ground like a wool blanket. "I don't want to make the same mistakes," she said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then don't. You'd stay through winter. Through whatever comes next." "I've already stayed longer than I meant to." "That's not an answer." He turned to her fully, voice low. "I've built fences. I've dug post holes. I've mended your barn and hauled your water. But none of that matters if you don't want me here. I do. Then say it plain. She stood slowly, brushing off her skirt. I want you here, Aaron Vega, every damn day. He rose with her. Then I'll be here. You have my word. She reached for his hand and he caught hers like it belonged to him. The fire snapped and settled behind them, and for the first time in years the quiet inside the house didn't feel hollow. It felt full, earned. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to, not yet. But come morning, when the sun broke through the clouds and the earth smelled like promise, Retta found herself standing at the doorway, watching him saddle the mule with Lyle at his side. She smiled, just once, then stepped out into the light. The first frost came early. A thin veil of white crusted the pasture grasses, brittle underfoot. Retta rose before dawn and found Aaron already splitting firewood near the barn, his breath ghosting in the cold. She handed him a wool scarf, one of her late husband's, and he accepted it without speaking. By the time sunlight broke through the bare pecan trees, Lula was awake and dragging her blanket toward the hearth while Lyle spooned ashes into the stove to stoke the coals back to life. Retta laid out cornmeal and lard for biscuits, her fingers stiff from the chill. Aaron came inside just before breakfast, warming his hands near the stove but keeping his distance by the door. "Snow's coming," he said, glancing toward the window. Retta didn't look up. "You sure? A mule deer crossed low ground yesterday." "They don't do that unless they feel it." She brushed flour from her fingers. "We'll need to butcher before it hits." "I set the trap pen last night. That old sow's fat enough to be worth the mess." She nodded, then motioned toward him. "Come sit." "You're letting all the heat out." Aaron hesitated before stepping inside fully, taking the bench across from where Lula perched with her doll. She stared at him while he pulled his gloves off, her eyes narrowed. "You've got a scar," she said, pointing at his wrist. Aaron turned his hand over, the pale line jagged against his skin. "Caught it on a broken stirrup, down by Sabinal." Lula leaned forward. "Did it bleed?" "More than I liked." She seemed satisfied and went back to braiding yarn into her doll's hair. Later, after the children were sent to help gather kindling near the creek bed, Retta stood outside with Aaron, surveying the smokehouse where a corner of the roof had bowed inward. "That'll buckle if the snow's heavy," she said. "We need to shore it. I've got a beam we can use. I'll cut braces today. You'll need someone to hold it steady." Aaron looked at her, the wind lifting the ends of her hair. "You offering? Don't think I'd trust anyone else." He gave a small nod, then turned toward the shed. Retta followed. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dried salt. They worked in silence, lifting the beam together, bracing it against the joist while she held it upright and he hammered it into place. "You were right," she said after a while, "about the weight of this place." He didn't glance down. "Still willing to carry it? I think I already am." The hammer paused in his hand. "You ever think about starting over, somewhere else?" She didn't answer right away. "I used to, but this land's buried under my fingernails. My children belong here." He drove the last nail deep and stepped back. "And me," she met his eyes. "I think you do too." That night, while the wind pushed against the walls and the children slept bundled in quilts near the fire, Retta stepped out onto the porch. The stars were faint, hidden behind thick cloud. She wrapped her shawl tight and stood listening to the quiet. Aaron was mending tack beneath the overhang, the lantern beside him casting a soft gold circle. "You should come in," she said, voice low. He didn't look up. "I've got one more strap to finish." "There's no law says it can't wait." He set the leather down and turned to her, eyes unreadable in the dark. "You asking me to stay in the house? You've earned more than a blanket in the dirt." He stood slowly and followed her inside, careful to shut the door behind him without a sound. They didn't speak. She poured him a mug of warmed cider, handed it to him, and sat across the table. The fire cracked once in the hearth. Aaron looked around the room at the worn table, the patched curtains, the braided rug worn thin by years of footprints. "This place, it's not much," he said. "It's everything we've got," he nodded. "And if I stayed, really stayed, what would you expect of me?" Retta leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "To wake up beside me, to raise these children like they're yours, to build what we can out of what's left. And you? I'd give you a home that doesn't vanish, a woman who doesn't scare easy, a place to put your name." He reached across the table, rough fingers curling around hers. "Then fool's what I'll be." She stood and moved to him, quiet as dusk. He rose to meet her. They didn't rush. There was no need. When they lay down that night, it was in the same bed, beneath the same roof, with the storm pressing gently against the windows like a promise. Around them, the house held steady. And so did they. The snow arrived before sunup, soft and slow, laying a pale hush across the land. Retta stood at the window with her arms crossed, watching the flakes gather along the fence rails. Inside, the stove crackled low, its warmth curling into the corners of the house. Aaron had already gone out to check the stock, his boots leaving deliberate prints across the yard. Lyle stirred beneath the quilt near the hearth, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Lula was curled against him, her leg tucked close, the splint Aaron had carved still in place. Retta let them sleep. The stillness felt like something rare, something earned. When Aaron returned, his coat dusted white, he carried 2 eggs and a quiet look. "Henhouses holding," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "One of the reds laid again." "They're stubborn," Retta said, taking the eggs into the kitchen. "That one near pecked my fingers off last spring." Aaron leaned against the doorframe, silent a moment. "That barn'll need bracing come thaw. Floor's soft in the back stall," she nodded. "There's that pine we never cut up by the ridge, could use it. I'll haul it down, Lyle can help. His shoulders are coming up strong." She turned and met his eyes. "He's proud of you, I'm not his blood. You don't need to be." Aaron stepped in, quiet on his feet. "You ever imagine it like this?" he asked. "A winter with someone again?" She shook her head. "Not after Elias. I thought I'd done my share of hoping." He reached out, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You didn't have to keep waiting. You could have said yes to someone else. Someone easier." "I didn't want easier," she said. "I wanted someone who'd stand beside me when the fire burned low. Someone who'd split wood and carry water and not look for something sweeter down the road." His hand stayed at her cheek. "And now I see you clear." He bent, slow and sure, and kissed her. There was no rush in it, no trembling. Just warmth and the weight of things long held and finally shared. By mid-morning, the children were bundled and outside, chasing each other through the snow with shrieks that echoed off the hills. Retta sat on the porch while Aaron mended a snapped strap with one knee up, his hand steady, his voice low as he explained the tool's purpose to Lyle, who sat cross-legged beside him, listening close. Later, Retta pulled down a box from the high shelf above the hearth. Inside it was the deed, brittle-edged and yellowed, signed in her husband's fine, slanted hand. Folded beneath it was a second paper, one she'd never had the courage to finish. A will, half-written, naming guardianship and land rights. She held it for a long while, then set it aside. That night, after the children were asleep, she brought it to Aaron, who sat carving a handle at the kitchen table. "I want you to see this," she said, placing the old deed in front of him. He didn't touch it. "You sure? I want your name beside mine on it." He looked up. "That's not something you offer just for fixing fences." "I'm not offering for that," she said. "I'm offering because every day you're here I breathe easier." He set down the carving and stood. "Retta, if I put my name down, I'm not ever leaving. I know, I mean that, not for a better job, not for easier land, not for anything. She reached for his hand. Then let's make it ours. They signed it together, her hand steady, his ink dark and bold beside hers. She tucked the paper back into its envelope and slid it into the box. No ceremony, just truth. The snow deepened that week. The days turned slow and hushed, the kind that settled into the bones. They chopped wood, salted meat, and taught Lula how to thread a needle for mending. Lyle took to whittling, his tongue between his teeth as he shaped a bird for his sister. Aaron started coming in before dark, his boots by the door, his coat hung beside Retta's. At night, after the fire was banked and the shutters latched, they lay side by side, hands linked beneath the quilt. Spring came in fits and starts. Rain loosened the frozen ground, and shoots of green curled up through the cracked soil. The red cow birthed a spotted calf, and Lyle named it Pickle, for no reason he could explain. Lula's limp faded with the warming days, and before long she was chasing chickens again, her hair wild around her shoulders. One morning, Retta stood at the stove flipping corn cakes while Aaron leaned over the table, showing Lyle how to tally sheep with a knotted string. The window was open, the breeze sweet with mesquite bloom. "You think we'll get another year this good?" she asked, not turning. Aaron looked over at her. "I think we've got all the years we want," she smiled just a little. "Then let's take them," he nodded. One at a time. They built a life slow and true, the kind that didn't need much noise to hold strong. Aaron never left. He never even looked like he wanted to. He planted peach trees that first spring, and every year after they bloomed a little fuller. When neighbors came through, they always said the same thing, that the Albright place had found its footing again, that the house looked proud, that the children smiled bigger than they used to. And when Retta stood on the porch in the evening, watching Aaron walk up from the field, Lyle's tall frame beside him, Lula waving from the fence rail, she felt it deep. The long road behind, the solid ground ahead, and the man who'd met her in the middle of it and stayed. It wasn't the life she'd expected. It was better. It was theirs.